I'm Jean Braithwaite, and this video about the ladder of abstraction is part of my Improve Your Writing series. I teach a variety of writing classes, and I typically include my ladder of abstraction lesson in the first week of class. That's how fundamental I think it is. If you only learn one thing from me ever, this is my pick for the thing that will give you the maximum payoff. I recommend this concept for my students at every level, and for my faculty colleagues too, regardless of whether your interest is scholarly writing, argumentation, journalism, or creative writing, which is what I mostly teach. The ladder of abstraction is a semantic concept. If you don't know what semantics is, it's a subfield of linguistics, which is the study of how language works. Semantics is the branch of linguistics that studies meaning, which we can agree, I think, that meaning is pretty important to a writer. That's not to say that everybody has to study semantics to be a great writer, and plenty of highly effective writers never heard of the ladder of abstraction, and they don't consciously notice any of the things I'm about to talk about. But what they have done is mastered the art of communicating their intended meaning on some intuitive level. So what I want to do today is to pull these unconscious intuitions out into the light, where you can make an effort to consciously notice them and consciously improve them. Quick reference, the person who came up with the term and the concept of ladder of abstraction is Hayakawa. So if you're currently a student in my class, don't worry, this name is not going to be on any test. This is just for background and entertainment because, in fact, Hayakawa had a really interesting life. You can check him out on Wikipedia. He was a Republican senator from California in the mid-70s, starting in the mid-70s, 6 years. Before that, he was a university president, and before that, he was a semi-famous public intellectual on account of his very important book, Language in Action, which was a book of the month club right before World War II, actually. And then he revised and expanded it later, retitled it Language and Thought in Action. And all told, there were 5 editions over the years, over the course of 4 decades total. According to Hayakawa, he wrote the first version of the book in large part as a response to the dangers of propaganda, and like Hitler's propaganda specifically, to help people think critically and not to succumb to the slogans of fear and race hatred. So I just thought I'd mention that, making this recording in August of 2020, so it's been on my mind, the slogans of fear and race hatred. Anyway, so S.I. Hayakawa has written about how uncomfortable it could be for him during the years of World War II, and people would give him funny looks, like at the bus stop and stuff, like, why is this Japanese-looking guy walking around in public like this instead of being in an internment camp with the other Japanese Americans? And the reason is that although he was working in Chicago at the time, he was actually still a Canadian citizen, so the internment law didn't apply to him, and he didn't get rounded up along with other Japanese people of Japanese origin. Then later on, when he was a U.S. Senator in the 70s, remember, he actually opposed any official apologies or reparations for the Japanese Americans who were interned. So, like I said, he was a Republican senator. Very unusual person and unusual life, and that particular stance did not win him any friends. But that's enough about S.I. Hayakawa. A very, very basic semantic concept is that linguistic expressions can refer to things. So I've drawn up a small illustration here. Let's say that you invited me to dinner at your house, and when I get there, your cat is rolling around on the table. I'm allergic to cats, so I have some feelings about this situation. I speak, saying, "Please remove the cat from the table." Merely by making some noises with my mouth, I am able to convey an idea from my brain to your brain. You now realize something about my mental state, namely that I wish the cat was not in its present position. Meaning has been communicated. We can break that down further to note that the expression "the cat" is understood by both people to refer to that furry mammal that's in the room with us, and the expression "the table" refers to the piece of furniture that's in the room with us. And those referring expressions, they can be reused as building blocks to say other stuff, mixing in some other words, of course, and an infinite number of different ideas could be conveyed. Look, The cat is on the table. May I pet the cat on the table? How many cats could we fit on the table? So the idea of referring, and that these expressions, the cat and the table, refer, is that assuming the two of us know the same language, these noises I make with my mouth, or in the case of writing, the marks that I made on this page, the C-A-T, are connected in systematic ways with ideas in my head and ideas in your head and stuff that's actually out there in the real world. If you Google ladder of abstraction, a number of specific examples will pop up. I'm going to show you two. You can immediately and intuitively see that there's a series of linguistic expressions here that are related to each other in a very definite pattern. Specifically, each time you move upward a rung on this ladder, you're simultaneously widening your scope of reference, the number of things that are referred to by the expression, but also losing specific information. An M16A2 rifle is one type of rifle, but there are also other kinds of rifle. A rifle is one type of weapon. Every rifle is a weapon, but not every weapon is a rifle. A weapon is one type of instrument of war. Something like an aircraft carrier, for instance, is also an instrument of war, but an aircraft carrier isn't in itself a weapon. So the boundaries of the category expand each time we go up a rung. The next one up on this particular illustration of the ladder is material. I prefer the French pronunciation, or more or less anyway, matériel, as in men and materiel. Materiel being everything you need to fight a war that isn't a human being, which would include uniforms and boots and MREs and lots of other basic supply kinds of stuff, in addition to the big ticket items like aircraft carriers. All right, here's the next example. Similarly, on the bottom rung here, the expression Jerry Garcia, which in this case is a proper name instead of a noun, but that refers to a single individual, the now deceased guitarist of the Grateful Dead. There's a couple of complexities here, because actually there's a lot of other guys in the world named Jerry Garcia. Here's a quick screenshot of the results of entering Jerry Garcia into my Facebook search bar. So we're kind of gliding past the fact that lots of context cues are also coming into play, and that I want you to think about that one Jerry Garcia, not just any Jerry Garcia. Probably not all the guys on Facebook are in fact rock guitarists, even though they're named Jerry Garcia. So the particular one that we have in mind, the now dead Jerry Garcia, was an example of a rock guitarist, and a rock guitarist is one type of guitarist, which is one type of musician, which is one type of artist, etc. Incidentally, bibliography here, the credit for the Jerry Garcia ladder of abstraction goes to Jorge Arango, and I don't know who originally made the rifle one. I found it on several different blog posts without attribution, so anybody wants to make a research project out of that, let me know what you discover. I don't think it was Hayakawa himself, or at least it couldn't have been in the earlier editions of his books. Now I'm going to make an analogy between the ladder of abstraction and mapping software like Google Earth and similar programs. You have the power to zoom in so close that you can see the tree in your front yard and the car in your driveway, or to zoom out so far that both coasts of the US are showing. Sugar and Sprague is a specific geographical location in Edinburgh. Happens to be the nearest major intersection to my house. And my students will know that Edinburgh is a town in Hidalgo County, in the upper Rio Grande Valley, in South Texas, etc. And at any given second, depending on your communicative needs, there's an exactly right level to be at that will keep your reader oriented and control their attention and provide the right amount of information. Now, when there is a misfire between your writerly intentions and what the reader got out of your writing, 9 times out of 10 it's the same problem. You stayed too high up on the ladder of abstraction for too long. It's very easy to drift upward because we're constantly thinking of what are the largest implications and highest level theses or themes that we want the reader to care about. But what people attach to most readily and care about the most is detail. If you tell somebody Jerry Garcia, they can generally use that to construct for themselves the idea rock guitarist or musician or human being. Those concepts come along with the more specific example for free, so to speak. Readers can generalize for themselves, but they can't particularize for themselves, or at least not nearly as easily. You can't tell them guitarist and expect them to come up with Jerry Garcia as the specific guitarist you may have in mind. Incidentally, abstract objects can also be referred to. The world contains ideas, as well as cats and rifles and Jerry Garcia. And even abstract objects can be ranked on a continuum of specificity. The ladder of abstraction is an example of a semantic concept, etc. I could save myself a whole lot of teaching time by just writing, "Get lower on the ladder of abstraction" on every paper turned into me. I'd be right almost every time, even without reading them. Once in a while, it's the opposite. Once in a while, people get bogged down in unnecessary detail. This is way more common with specialists in a particular field than it is with beginning writers. If you're a great big expert in something, you might need to click upward on the map every so often to remind people of the bigger picture and where it fits in, which they might not understand as well as you do. Great writers roam up and down the ladder of abstraction every time they write. There need to be generalizing upward movements, and there need to be particularizing downward movements. Both of these moves are necessary and valuable. When we move downward, we gain information and specificity and vividness. When we move upward, we lose that specific information, but we gain scope. You click out far enough, a whole continent fits on your screen. The key is controlling your reader's attention and being able to shift smoothly. So I want you to notice this as you read. This is your assignment. Pick a piece of writing in your favorite genre or your professional field that you think is well written, and just notice how high up the ladder the writer is at any given moment. There is a default starting position for introducing a new topic, and that's one rung up from the bottom. I'm going to have a lot more to say about this in part 2 of this video, which is particularly directed at creative writers. If you're not a creative writer, you might not even need to watch part 2. Now I have a quiz question for you. There's actually a missing rung in the middle of this ladder. Do you see where? You can pause the video if you want to think about it for a little while and print out this one slide. And where could a shorter step have been taken in between two of these steps? I stuck an extra slide in here just to keep the quiz answer a little separated from the quiz question. This is my advertisement for the value of thinking about the ladder of abstraction and movements upward and movements downward on that ladder. Pause the tape now or rewind it a little if you aren't ready for the reveal. Last chance. Tick, tick, tick. Okay, here it is. A rifle is one type of firearms, and firearms are one type of weapon. Every firearm is a weapon, but not every weapon is a firearm. When I do this in class with live in-person discussion, invariably somebody will suggest the word gun. So if you said gun, you're not crazy and stupid. Many minds went in that direction along with you. But in my opinion, it's not the best answer. That answer implies that a rifle is a type of gun. Would you want to say that? I have a little discomfort with that. My mental image of rifle has a long barrel, and my mental image of at least the prototypical gun has a short barrel. So I'd be happier thinking of gun as more like a sister branch to rifle than as a node placed above rifle. Like you can imagine two different mini ladders of abstraction that converge upward in firearms. maybe we should begin to not call this a ladder anymore, but a semantic hierarchy chart or a conceptual hierarchy chart. It's the same basic thing. Use whatever term you like. To me, the word gun connotes a handgun type thing, at least in the absence of other context. So gun is tricky. Gun is a squishier, more amorphous term than any of the others that we've put on the table so far. Check this out. I expanded the scope just a smidgen on our newly added firearm semantic hierarchy chart. Not exactly a ladder anymore, but more of a lattice, right? So let's say the next step up in abstraction from firearms is ballistic weapons. Again, I'm tossing in another intermediate rung here, right? I'm not making the move directly from rifle to weapon the way that first ladder did. So firearms are one type of ballistic weapon, namely the portable type that a single individual could use and carry around. But not every ballistic weapon is a firearm. For instance, cannons. You don't toss a cannon in your purse or hang it on your gun rack. So a cannon is not a type of firearm. And since a gun is even lower than that, even lower than firearm in the conceptual or semantic hierarchy, or the ladder if you want to call it that, it seems pretty clear that logically speaking, a cannon is also not a type of gun. And yet, people refer to cannons that way all the time. The big guns, or let's pull the guns over to the left flank and keep the infantry on the right. This kind of semantic drift or squishiness, or you might call it mission creep, is very common. Frequently used words, short words, seemingly simple words, like your go-to words, it's not at all unusual for them to not stay neatly confined to their place in the hierarchy. They can wiggle around. And once you start thinking about this and looking for examples, you'll find lots of other ones. For instance, the word man, sometimes people use it to mean a human being as compared to an animal or as man versus nature kind of thing. Sometimes they use it more specifically to mean a male human being as opposed to a woman. The word metaphor is often, particularly in high school English classes, contrasted quite specifically to another figure of speech, the simile, metaphor versus simile. But then metaphor is also used as a kind of a cover term for the whole class of any kind of figurative expressions. Alrighty. So the words like that, wiggly words like gun, you always have the option of choosing more precise vocabulary, okay? You don't have to say gun because you can say firearm, or you can say handgun, depending on what it is you want to do. You can say ballistic weaponry. If you choose these high precision terms, there won't be any risk of, a misfire between the scope that you intended for your expression, the referring expression, and the one that your audience picks up. However, I'm not saying never use a word like gun, because sometimes you might have a very good reason to want exactly that flexibility and ambiguity that you get from a word that can move around the hierarchy like that. I'm just saying, I don't want it to happen by accident. I want every decision that you make to be a conscious decision, well aware of the risks and potential benefits. Do it deliberately. All right, we're pretty much done here. Final thoughts to leave you with. So here's my last word on the subject. Fine writers have all, at least intuitively, mastered the ladder of abstraction, and they can easily move downward, particularizing and concretizing, or upward, generalizing and abstracting. Both moves are important, but for the typical writer, they need to push themselves harder to make the downward movement, because generalizing comes so very easily to us human beings. It's a lot harder to train yourself not to automatically generalize. And from the reader's perspective too, they will always be generalizing on their own, even without your help. In some highly technical circumstances, they might need more of your help making the generalizations and seeing the big picture. All right, creative writers should proceed to the second